It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to spend a week alone in the woods of northern France. I was 27 at the time and had recently left a stressful job in logistics that had burned me out completely. I didn't want to be around cities or people or even phone signals. I just wanted space, forest, water, and silence. I picked a forested area about an hour southeast of Reims. It wasn't a popular hiking zone, which was exactly why I chose it. It bordered a few farming villages and had a stretch of thick woods that hadn't seen much foot traffic in years. Most of the trails were overgrown, and any signs I saw online about the area were from older posts years out of date. It didn't matter to me. I packed a basic tent, some supplies, and a hand-drawn map printed from an old satellite image. I wanted rough, I wanted quiet, I wanted isolation. I parked my car along a dirt pull-off at the edge of a narrow farm road and hiked in on foot. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the place I'd picked. A spot near an old, dried-up riverbed that looked like it hadn't flowed in decades. On satellite, it was just a pale scar through the forest, curving gently east, with the trees hugging its edges. I found a slightly raised patch under some oaks and pitched my tent there. The light was soft that evening, and I remember thinking the whole area felt untouched. No wrappers, no footprints, no tire tracks. Just moss, bark, and wind. Felt right. For the first 2 days, nothing strange happened. I hiked in the early mornings, boiled water from a nearby stagnant pool that I filtered through a kit I bought, and spent the afternoons reading or just sitting. I didn't bring music. I wanted everything to be quiet. I only brought one old Nokia phone that had a flashlight, and it stayed turned off most of the time. The third day was when I found the tank. I was hiking east along the old riverbed, trying to trace it toward a dense patch of trees that looked almost black from above, what I assumed was a tight fir grove. But I never made it that far. A few hundred meters in, the slope of the riverbed dipped down sharper, and I saw something metallic through the trees, half buried and covered in leaf rot. At first I thought it was a trailer or maybe some kind of camper, but as I pushed through the underbrush and got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a rusted military tank. Not a modern one, this was an old beast, probably from the 1940s or earlier. The turret was missing, and the body had sunk into the earth at a slight angle, as if it had slipped sideways down the riverbank and just settled there over decades. Trees had grown around it. One pine had even pushed up right through a crack in the rear hatch. It was part of the forest now. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. The hatch was open, just a rectangular hole near the top where the turret once was. The steel around it was jagged and bent, probably from being blown off. I didn't climb inside. I didn't need to. It was enough just standing there, imagining who had driven it, how it had gotten there, why it had been abandoned so deep in the forest. There weren't any roads nearby. The nearest flat land was miles away. I went back to camp that night feeling unsettled. Not scared exactly, but there was something strange about how untouched it felt. Like it had been there for 70 years and not one person had stepped foot near it. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of metal. It wasn't loud, just a faint clink, like something tapping steel. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my ears sharp. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe a branch scraping the tent pole. But then it came again. Clink, pause, clink. It was steady, distant. I sat frozen for a while, my hand hovering over the zipper of the tent. I hadn't zipped it all the way closed. There was a small gap near the bottom for air. I leaned forward and listened. The sound wasn't getting closer, but it also wasn't stopping. I couldn't tell how far away it was. Maybe 100 meters? Maybe more? Eventually it stopped, just as suddenly as it had begun. I stayed awake for another hour, gripping the flashlight, but nothing else happened. In the morning, I told myself it had just been a branch falling onto the tank, or maybe a pine cone bouncing off the rusted hull. I made coffee, ate dry granola, tried to shake it off. I didn't go back to the tank. I felt like I shouldn't, but the next night the sound came again, around the same time. Clink, clink, but this time it was followed by something heavier, a dragging sound like stone on earth, slow, rhythmic. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I packed my things and moved camp about a kilometer west. I found a ridge with more wind and better visibility. I could still see the dried riverbed from where I was, but the tank was out of view. I told myself it was probably animals, maybe wild boars nosing around metal, but I still slept with the flashlight in my hand and a small pocket knife tucked under my sleeping pad. On the 5th day, I saw someone. It was around noon. I was collecting water from the pool when I looked up and saw a man standing on the far side of the dried riverbed, maybe 70 meters away. He wasn't facing me. He was just standing with his back turned, looking at the woods. He was wearing dark clothes, gray pants and something like a dark green jacket, but I couldn't make out any details. No backpack, no gear, no hat, just stillness. I froze. I don't know how long I watched. Maybe 20 seconds, maybe a minute. Then I blinked and he was gone. Not slowly walking, not ducking behind anything, just not there anymore. The trees rustled in the wind like normal. The water dripped from my bottle like normal. I packed up again and hiked west. I was supposed to stay for 2 more nights, but I decided to head back toward the car. I didn't sleep that night. I just hiked under the stars until my legs gave out around 3 a.m., then rested until dawn under a tree. I thought if I stayed moving, whatever it was wouldn't find me, but I wasn't fast enough. The next morning, just as the sun rose behind the trees, I saw footprints. Not mine. I had been following a faint game trail through the brush when I stopped at a patch of soft earth. There were prints in the dirt, heavy boots, deep, fresh. They were coming from the east, the direction of the tank. They followed the same trail I was on, leading west, leading toward where I had slept. I stopped breathing for a moment. I turned around, trying to see if anyone was behind me. Nothing, but my body knew before my mind caught up. I wasn't alone. I wasn't being paranoid. Someone was out here. Someone was watching. I started walking faster. Not running, just moving quickly, cutting off the trail and going straight through the trees. I checked behind me every 5 minutes. My pack was heavy. My legs were sore, but I kept going. By early evening, I reached the edge of the forest and saw the dirt road where I'd left the car. But the car was gone. I stood there in silence. The little patch of dirt where my tires had been was empty. No glass, no debris. Just 2 faint ruts in the grass. It didn't make sense. No one knew I was out there. I had locked it. I had the keys. I walked in circles, panicked, sweating. I checked my phone. Still no signal. The sun was dropping. I had no shelter, barely any food, and now no ride. I decided to follow the road west, hoping it would eventually lead to a farm or a house. I walked until it got dark again. Then I stepped off the road and built a small fire with twigs and dry grass. I didn't sleep. That night I heard the clink again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was on the road. I sat behind a tree, barely breathing, the fire dead out. I listened as the sound got closer. Metal tapping stone, slow footsteps, heavy, passed by me just a few meters away. I couldn't see anything through the dark, but I could feel the weight of it. Something or someone, walking in the dark without a flashlight, dragging metal. I didn't move until the sun came up. The next morning, I walked until I saw a house. It was an old stone farmhouse at the edge of a field, with a small tractor parked out front. I nearly cried when I saw it. I knocked until someone came out. An older man, confused, a little cautious. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I just asked to use his phone and told him I had gotten lost hiking. He let me call the local gendarmes, who came an hour later. I filed a report, said my car had been stolen near the woods. They didn't seem surprised. One of them, quiet, older, asked me where exactly I had camped. When I told him about the riverbed, his face changed just slightly. Not fear, just a kind of tired understanding. He didn't ask more. They gave me a ride to the train station in Reims. I never saw the car again. I never found out who took it or how. A few weeks later, I got a message from the gendarmes. They'd gone into the woods near where I said I camped. They found some footprints, but not much else. They asked if I had left anything behind, any food wrappers, gear. I said no. But then the officer added something else. Something I never told anyone until now. He said they found old tire tracks, deep in the dirt near the dried-up riverbed. Not fresh, decades old. 2 sets, one matching my car and one older. Much older. They followed them a short distance before they vanished into the trees. The strange thing, he said, was that the older ones seemed to stop right next to where the tank was. But I never told them about the tank. And I never went camping alone again. It was 2018 when I decided to take a solo camping trip up to the hills just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. I was 32 at the time. I'd just gone through a tough breakup and wanted to clear my head. I'd done solo trips before, nothing too dangerous, mostly just out in the woods for a few days with a tent, my gear, and a small fire to keep me company. This time, I wanted something more remote. Something where I could go off-grid for a bit, no phone, no people, no noise, just silence and space. I picked a forested area west of Perryville. I'd scouted it out the year before when I was hiking with a friend. The land wasn't exactly part of a park, but it was one of those stretches where the borderlines were fuzzy, not private property but not officially managed either. There were some old gravel roads and trails that led deeper in, and most people didn't bother going that far. That was exactly what I wanted. I loaded up my old Nissan Frontier with my gear, tent, tarp, food supplies, a foldable chair, and a small cooler with water and some basic groceries. I had a hunting knife on me, not that I expected trouble, and I brought my dad's old Remington .22 just in case. I'd never fired it at anything but cans, but it gave me a sense of security. I packed light but thorough. I got there around 2 p.m. on a Friday. The weather was warm but overcast, the kind of gray that made the woods feel a little heavier. I drove my truck as far down the gravel road as it would go, another 5 or 6 miles past where the asphalt ended. After a while, the road got too rough to drive on. Deep ruts, fallen branches, rocks. I parked near a bend in the trail and walked the rest of the way in with my pack. It took me maybe an hour to reach the clearing I remembered. It was a little sunken area surrounded by trees on 3 sides, about 30 feet wide with soft ground, perfect for pitching a tent. You couldn't see it from the trail, and it felt far away from everything. That was the goal. I set up camp quickly, got the tent up, laid down the tarp underneath, staked everything tight. I built a small fire pit with some rocks and dug a short trench to drain any rain. It was quiet, really quiet. I remember noticing how still everything was. No wind, not much in the way of birds or animals. Just the kind of silence you only get when you're far from anything human. By the time the fire was going and I was sitting in the camp chair, the sun had started to go down behind the ridge. I remember eating a granola bar and some jerky while watching the flames. I felt okay. Not great, but okay. I wasn't jumpy or anything. Just tired and a little hollowed out from everything going on back home. I think part of me expected this trip to fix something in me. I went to bed early that night, maybe around 9. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the forest settle. There were some night sounds, bugs, a few owls, distant rustles, the usual stuff. I fell asleep without much trouble. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up needing to piss. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped out barefoot into the dirt. The fire had died out to just some glowing embers. The trees loomed around the camp like a fence. I stepped a few feet from the tent, did my business, and was about to head back inside when I heard something up the hill behind me. Just a sound, a dull clink, like metal against metal. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it didn't belong out here. I turned and stared into the darkness. My eyes had adjusted enough to make out shapes, tree trunks, fallen branches, some low brush, but nothing moved. I waited maybe a minute, standing still, heart picking up its pace. Then I shrugged it off and got back in the tent. Probably a branch falling, I told myself. Maybe a rock slipping. I zipped up and lay there for a long time listening, but nothing followed. I eventually fell asleep again. The next morning was cloudy, still and gray. I made coffee over the little fire, sat in my chair again, and tried to shake the weird feeling from the night before. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. Mine were barefoot, shallow, and led a short distance from the tent to a tree. These were deeper with boot treads. They came from the trail. They curved around the camp and then went back the way they came. There was no mistaking it. Someone had walked through my camp in the middle of the night. Quietly, deliberately, I stood there staring at them for a long time. There weren't many, maybe 5 or 6, like the person had taken slow steps, watching where they moved. I didn't see any sign of a flashlight. The tracks came within 10 feet of my tent. That put a knot in my stomach. I should have packed up and left right then, but I didn't. I told myself it was probably a hunter or hiker who didn't know I was there. But it didn't make sense. Who walks around a remote forest at 2 or 3 in the morning without a light? And why come so close to a tent without saying something? Still, I stayed. I boiled water, ate oatmeal, tried to enjoy the quiet. Around noon, I grabbed the Remington and walked up the hill behind the camp, toward where I thought the footsteps came from. I followed the trail for maybe a half-mile and didn't see anyone. The forest was as empty as it had been the day before. But then I saw the truck. It was maybe another half-mile further up, half hidden off the trail behind a screen of tall brush and pines. Old, beat-up Ford. Rust on the doors. Windows tinted too dark. It had no plates. There were tire tracks in the mud like it had been parked there for a while. I approached it slowly, keeping my distance, feeling stupid and paranoid but also tense. The cab was empty. Nothing visible inside. No gear, no trash, nothing. Just too clean. The kind of clean that feels wrong. I backed off. I didn't touch it. Just turned and walked away as calmly as I could, even though my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I got back to camp around 2 p.m. and sat in the chair again, gun across my lap. That's when I made the call. One more night. I'd stay one more night, and if anything else weird happened, I'd pack out before sunrise. The second night didn't feel the same. Everything sounded louder. The wind picked up a little. I could hear trees creaking, and every crackle in the brush made me turn my head. I kept the fire going longer that time and kept the gun closer. I barely ate anything. I didn't want to leave the firelight, so I just sat there watching the flames and listening to the dark. At some point after midnight, I heard movement again. This time it wasn't subtle. Branches snapping, heavy steps, just far enough away to be hard to see, but close enough that it wasn't an animal. Too slow, too deliberate. Then silence again. Then I saw it. Just a shape. A dark outline behind a tree maybe 30 feet from camp. I could barely see it, but it was there. Person standing completely still, watching, not moving. I raised the rifle and aimed. Not to fire, but to let whoever it was know I saw them. I didn't say anything. I just held it steady. After a few seconds, the shape backed off slowly. No sound. Just gone. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the fire going all night. I sat up in the chair with the rifle across my legs until the sky turned pale. To first light, I broke camp. I didn't even eat. Just stuffed everything into the pack, collapsed the tent, and left. I didn't care about neatness. I just wanted to get out. I kept the rifle in my hands as I walked, checking behind me constantly. The trail felt longer on the way out. My boots dragged. My head throbbed. When I finally got to my truck, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Someone had moved it. It was only about 20 feet from where I parked it. Just slightly shifted, angled differently, but it wasn't me who did it. And there were new tire tracks beside it. Wider, deeper. Another vehicle had been there, and the person who drove it had touched mine. I opened the driver's door slowly, half expecting something to be missing or broken, but everything was still inside: backpack, extra gas, map. Nothing stolen, just touched. I checked the bed. Same thing. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking. I didn't stop driving until I hit the first gas station 30 miles away. I sat in the lot for a long time, just trying to breathe. I didn't report it. What was I going to say? That someone stood outside my tent one night and moved my truck the next? That I found an unmarked vehicle parked in the woods like a trap? I didn't want to explain any of it. I just wanted to forget it. But I never went camping alone again. Not after that. Not even close. And to this day, every time I see an old truck on a back road with dark windows and no plates, my heart starts racing. Because I know someone was out there those nights, watching me, waiting. And I don't think it was random. I think they'd done it before. And I think maybe, just maybe, I left before they could finish what they came there to do. I went camping alone in the summer of 2019. I was 27 then, and I had just quit my job in Birmingham. Burnt out, tired of staring at screens and spreadsheets all day. It wasn't dramatic, just one of those quiet resignations you don't tell many people about. I needed a break. I didn't know what I wanted next, but I knew I didn't want to spend another day sitting under fluorescent lights eating stale sandwiches. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I didn't plan any big trips. Instead, I packed my old hiking bag, grabbed my tent, sleeping bag, stove, and drove up to Shropshire. I'd been reading about the Clun Valley and the old forests near the border with Wales. It looked peaceful: remote hills, long walking paths, thick woods, little stone villages with barely any phone signal. Just what I needed. I parked near a small pull-off along a B road, a bit west of Bishop's Castle. There were no signs, no campsites, just a sloping trail that led into the trees. I had marked out a rough route: spend a night in the forest, walk across some hills, maybe cross over into Powys if I felt like it. I wasn't trying to get anywhere fast. I just wanted quiet. It was late July, but the weather had cooled off after a heat wave. The sky was mostly gray with patches of sunlight breaking through. I started walking around noon, the trail overgrown but still visible. The trees got denser the further I went. Thick oaks, patches of pine, moss-covered stones, birds overhead, the sound of wind moving through the leaves. That first day was peaceful. I set up camp near a dry stone wall that was crumbling into the undergrowth. There wasn't a path nearby, no houses in sight, just trees in every direction. I set up my tent, boiled some water for tea, and ate some bread and cheese. The evening light slanted low through the canopy and the air felt still, almost heavy. I went to sleep early that night. My sleeping bag was warm, and for once, I didn't feel the pull to check my phone or think about what I'd do next in life. I drifted off listening to the wind outside. But around 2 a.m., I woke up. At first, I didn't know what had stirred me. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a shift in pressure. You know that strange sense when something feels off, like a presence has entered the room even if you didn't hear anything? That's what it felt like. I stayed still and listened. I could hear the usual rustling of the forest. Nothing heavy, no animals moving close by. But I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I didn't move for 10 minutes, just lay there staring at the roof of the tent, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then I heard something, a soft crunch. Not from the trees, but from much closer, maybe 20 feet away, like a boot stepping on a dry leaf. Then nothing again. I reached for the small torch I kept beside me and turned it on. Its weak yellow beam lit up the inside of the tent, but nothing beyond it. I didn't want to unzip the flap. I just lay there, heart racing, straining my ears, but the sound didn't come back. Eventually, I fell asleep again, torch still in hand. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. The forest looked the same. No broken branches, no sign of anything unusual. I told myself it had just been a deer or fox, that I had imagined the footsteps. It happens, especially when you're alone in the dark. I packed up and kept walking deeper into the hills. The air was cooler, the sky overcast. I followed an old logging trail that was barely more than a gap in the trees. Hours passed. I didn't see anyone. In the afternoon, I came across a small stream and followed it for a while. That's where I saw the figure. It was just a brief glimpse at first. Through the trees across the water, maybe 100 meters away, a man standing still, wearing dark clothes, not moving. I stopped walking and stared. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there among the trees. At that distance, I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't doing anything, just facing my direction. I looked away for a second to adjust my footing on the rocks by the stream, and when I looked back, he was gone. I called it paranoia. I told myself it was probably a walker, someone out exploring like me. Still, I kept checking behind me after that. I didn't like the feeling of being watched. I set up camp early that evening, this time near a shallow gully with thick brush on one side. I thought it would make it harder for animals or people to approach unnoticed. I didn't light a fire, just heated up a tin of soup and sat silently in my tent. Every sound outside felt louder than it should have. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement again. More deliberate this time, not an animal scurrying. This was slow, careful. Footsteps, pausing between steps. I held my breath. The sound circled the tent. I could hear twigs snapping lightly underfoot. Not close enough to be right beside me, but near, maybe 30 feet. Then nothing. I didn't move. I stayed completely still until sunrise. When the light finally came, I stepped outside quickly, heart racing, expecting to find something. Footprints, anything. But the ground was dry and hard. I couldn't see any clear tracks. The forest was quiet again. That day, I decided to change direction and head back toward the road. I didn't want to turn the trip into something miserable. I told myself I was just being jumpy, but I knew deep down that something was wrong.
I valked fast, barely stopping.
It had started to drizzle lightly, and everything looked darker under the gray sky. By late afternoon, I reached a spot I remembered from the first day. I was maybe an hour's walk from the road. I decided to set up camp one last night before heading back. I didn't want to get caught trying to hike out after dark. This time, I didn't even pitch the tent. I laid my sleeping bag under a thick yew tree and wrapped myself in a tarp. The rain came down harder. I didn't eat. I just lay there, listening to the forest and the rain on the leaves. At around 1 a.m., I saw him. He was standing between the trees, maybe 50 feet away, partially hidden in the shadows. He wasn't walking. He wasn't talking. He was just there, watching. He stood very still. I couldn't make out his features in the dark, but I could see the shape. Tall, hunched slightly, arms hanging at his sides. Not moving, not blinking. I didn't shine my torch. I didn't move. I just stared at him. He stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, maybe more. And then, without sound, He stepped backward into the trees and was gone. I didn't sleep at all. I sat up the rest of the night, gripping the handle of the small knife I carried in my pack. At first light, I packed everything and left. I didn't eat, didn't even check my map. I just walked. Fast. I didn't stop until I saw the road. My car was still there. Nothing looked disturbed. I threw everything in the boot and got in, locked the doors, and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes with my hands shaking. Then I started the engine and drove straight back to Birmingham. I never reported it. I didn't know what to report. A man standing in the woods? No triads, no crimes, just presence. But it was enough. I haven't gone camping alone since. Sometimes I think maybe he was just another hiker, someone who liked to wander the woods and didn't want company. But deep down, I know that's not what I saw. He was watching me, following me, silently for days. No reason.
No explanation.
I don't know what would have happened if I had stayed one more night. I try not to think about it. It was 2017 when I decided to drive out alone into the high desert of northern Arizona for a short camping trip. I was 34 then, working from home as a freelance graphic designer. I needed a break from the screen, from the notifications, from emails. I had always found the desert peaceful, especially the high elevation stretches near the Navajo Nation, where the land opens wide under a huge sky. I'd been to places around Flagstaff before, but this time I aimed farther northeast, toward a stretch of remote land near the Ozark Mountains. I'd never camped there before, but I read online that it was quiet, remote, and dry this time of year. Seemed perfect. I packed light, just my tent, a decent sleeping bag, enough water for a few days, and a small cooler of food. I brought my .38 revolver too, though I'd never needed it camping before. Still, I always brought it just in case. The drive took most of the day. I passed through small towns, Winslow, then Tuba City, then hit long stretches of road with no cell service. The highway gave way to dirt roads. I followed the GPS until it gave out, then relied on my offline map. By the time I picked a place to set up, the sun was hanging low, burning red across the top of the hills. I set up near a sparse cluster of juniper trees, far enough off the road that no one would see me unless they were really looking. The air was dry and still, no wind. I could hear the crunch of my boots on the dirt louder than anything else. That first night was quiet. I ate cold beans, drank a beer, and laid back against a small rock outcrop, watching the stars. The desert can feel like a different world at night, so quiet you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. I felt small, but I liked that. I slept well. The second day passed without anything strange. I hiked up one of the ridges nearby, took pictures, sat under a small bluff to avoid the sun, and returned before sunset. It was too quiet for any wildlife that day. No birds, not even bugs. I noticed that in passing, but I didn't think much of it then. I had 1 bar of cell signal when I climbed to the ridge, just enough to text my sister that I was okay. Then it cut out again. I liked being off the grid. That night, something changed. I started hearing sounds. They weren't loud, but they were enough to get my attention. I was already in my tent when it started, just after midnight, I think. I wasn't asleep yet. I usually lay there listening to the stillness before I doze off. But this night, I heard a faint crunching sound, like footsteps in dry dirt. Not close, not far. It was hard to tell in the open desert. I lay completely still, holding my breath. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds. Then nothing. I convinced myself it was probably an animal. Maybe a coyote. They live out here. They move at night. I unzipped my tent a little, peeking through the mesh. Nothing. The moon was nearly full, so I could see well. Still, I saw nothing but junipers and rock. I left the tent half unzipped so I could listen better. For maybe an hour, I didn't hear anything else. I started to relax again. Then it came back. The sound, but slower, creepier. This time it sounded deliberate, like whatever was walking wasn't trying to avoid making noise. Still no wind, no other sounds. Just that steady crunch. One step, wait. Another step, wait. I sat up. My heart started beating faster. I reached for the revolver and quietly pulled it from the holster hanging near my sleeping bag. I didn't aim it. I just held it. Whatever it was had stopped again. Dead silence. I stayed that way until dawn. When the sun came up, I got out and looked around. There were no tracks that I could see. Just the usual mess of dry soil, old brush, and some broken twigs. I felt stupid. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed it. I'd had weird half-awake dreams before while camping. I left the tent, unzipped the rest of the morning while I made coffee and walked around the camp. But I still kept the gun nearby. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I didn't want to admit I'd gotten spooked over nothing. So I stayed. Later that afternoon, I went for a longer walk, circling the low ridge about a mile out from camp. It was peaceful, sunny, silent again. That lack of sound had started to feel odd.
No birds. No bugs.
Not even ants on the ground. I found a dead rabbit near the edge of the ridge. Nothing had eaten it. It looked like it had just dropped dead.
No goons.
I stood there staring at it for a long time, then walked back quickly. That night, I didn't get in the tent. I sat outside in a folding chair with a headlamp and the gun across my lap. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but I was tense, and it got worse when I heard the noise again. A little after 11. Same sound. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. This time it was closer. I turned off my headlamp immediately and sat still. I strained my eyes in the moonlight. I saw movement behind one of the trees. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't a deer either. It looked like a man, but something about it was wrong. He was too tall. His limbs looked stretched, almost bent the wrong way. He didn't walk like a man. His legs moved like an animal's with too much bend at the knees. But he was upright. I could only make out his shape from the light. He was completely silent now, just standing still behind the trees. Couldn't see a face, just that outline. I raised the gun and waited. I didn't move. I was frozen. I wanted to call out, but I didn't. I just kept the revolver aimed. After what felt like 5 minutes, the figure stepped backward, still silent, then turned and disappeared into the dark. I didn't sleep at all. I didn't go inside the tent. I sat there until the sun came up. In the morning, I started packing fast. I didn't want to stay a minute longer. Everything went into the truck without being folded. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just packed and got behind the wheel. When I turned the truck around, I saw something. On the ground behind where I'd parked, someone or something had drawn a circle in the dirt. A perfect circle about 5 feet wide, with lines across it like a symbol, like it had been scraped with a stick or sharp rock. I hadn't seen it the day before. It hadn't been there. I was sure of it. I drove until I got back to the nearest paved road. Then I drove farther, to a small gas station just outside Chinley. I didn't talk to anyone. I just filled up and kept going until I got back to Flagstaff. I stayed in a motel that night, locked the door, kept the gun beside the bed. Back home in Tempe, I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself it was some local guy messing with me. Maybe someone who didn't want me camping on that land. That made sense, sort of. But the way that thing moved didn't make sense. The way it stood in the dark, silent, too still, didn't make sense either. And that circle behind the truck, that symbol, it made my stomach turn every time I thought about it. I didn't go camping for almost 2 years after that. Even now, when I camp, I stay in official sites. I don't go far from other people. I don't leave the tent unzipped at night. I never go alone. and I've never been back to that part of Arizona. I don't even drive near it. Something about that land felt wrong. I don't tell many people about that trip. They'd say it was a wild animal or a bad dream or some drunk drifter in the woods. But it wasn't. It was something else. Something that looked like a man but wasn't. Something that watched from just far enough to make you question yourself. Something that didn't make a sound. And whatever it was, it didn't want me there. That was enough for me. I was 23 the year I camped in the graveyard behind the old stone church in Derbyshire, England. It was the summer of 2007, early August. I remember because I had just left my job at the pub after 3 long years of night shifts and was planning a solo trip across the peaks. Just me, a backpack, and the open land. I'd done a bit of wild camping before, mostly woods, once in a quarry, but never in a graveyard. I didn't plan to sleep among the tombstones. It wasn't one of those challenges you see online now. I wasn't trying to be edgy or prove anything. It just happened that way. That evening, I'd hiked further than I meant to. My original plan was to set up camp near an old trail near Hope Valley, but I took a wrong path somewhere past Castleton and ended up walking much longer than expected. My feet were sore, my shoulders ached from the weight of the pack, and I hadn't eaten properly since lunch. By the time I reached the edge of a small village, one of those tucked away places with no name signs and a single road, I was too tired to keep going. It was close to 9. The sky was still a deep blue, but the sun had dropped behind the hills. I could feel that cold edge in the air that only comes at nightfall in the countryside. I saw the church before I saw the rest of the village. A short, square building with thick walls and a squat bell tower perched on a low hill. A stone wall surrounded the graveyard behind it, the gate half open. The village itself was silent. No traffic, no kids playing. A few houses, windows dark. There were no shops, no pub, and not even a petrol station that I could see. Just a narrow road, the church, and some scattered buildings. I stood there a while, deciding whether to knock on someone's door and ask for water, but something about the place made me keep walking. Not creepy, just still, too still. When I reached the church, I leaned against the low wall that bordered the graveyard. I told myself I'd rest there a moment and decide what to do next, but the longer I stayed, the more the idea of sleeping inside the graveyard made sense. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was disrespectful. But I was tired, hungry, and too far from the next village to try hiking on in the dark. The gate wasn't locked. No one was around. The grass inside was long and soft, dotted with headstones leaning every which way. Some were so old the letters had faded. A few graves were newer, shiny granite with names and dates I didn't want to read. I told myself I'd be gone by first light. I stepped through the gate and found a flat patch of grass near the back, behind a cluster of tall yews. The trees blocked the road from view. There were no lights nearby, just the faint glow of the sky behind the hills. I pitched my small green tent as quietly as I could. I laid out my mat, my sleeping bag, cracked open a tin of beans, and ate cold from the can. The air smelled of damp grass, earth, and something else. A dry, old smell like wood that had been closed up too long. It was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Not a single bird, no rustle in the trees. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. The air seemed thicker there, under the yews, like I was cut off from the rest of the world. I crawled into my tent around 10. I didn't bother changing clothes. I just zipped myself into the bag, pulled my rucksack inside, and switched off my headlamp. Took a long time to fall asleep. I wasn't scared exactly, just uneasy. I kept telling myself it was just another field, that the people buried here wouldn't care, that they'd been dead longer than I'd been alive. But something felt off. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud. It was soft, like movement in tall grass. first, I thought it was wind, but the tent walls weren't shifting. There was no breeze. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Then, after a few seconds, I heard it again. A faint rustle and then a tap. Then another. It wasn't wind. The taps sounded like they were coming from a few feet away. Small, rhythmic, like someone slowly brushing their hand along the stone wall or knocking on a gravestone. I sat up inside the tent, fully awake now, and waited. The sound stopped. I stayed like that for what felt like 15 minutes. Every muscle in my body was tense. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't look. I just sat there listening, heart hammering. Nothing. Not even a fox call in the distance. I kept telling myself it was an animal. Maybe a badger, maybe a hedgehog, but I'd spent enough nights outdoors to know those sounds. This didn't fit. It was too deliberate, too quiet. Eventually, I laid back down. I didn't fall asleep again. I just stared at the roof of the tent in the dark, breathing as slow as I could. Then, around 1:30, something touched the tent. It was light, almost a brush, like fingertips running along the fabric. It moved from the side, near my head, down toward the foot. I could hear it more than feel it, a faint swish of nylon being touched from the outside. I froze. My mind tried to make sense of it. No animal would do that, not that gently, and it was too slow to be the wind. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, staring wide-eyed at the shape of the tent above me, heart slamming in my chest. The touch came again, this time from the opposite side. Something circled the tent. I could hear footsteps now, very faint, like someone walking barefoot in the grass. Soft steps. A pause. Then another brush along the side. Not poking, not aggressive, almost curious, like someone trying to figure out what was inside without waking it. I didn't move a muscle. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 20. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I lay there the rest of the night, every sense on fire, stomach tight with fear. I never opened the tent. At some point near dawn, I must have drifted off. When I woke again, it was bright. Early light filtered through the tent walls, golden and warm. I listened. No sound. Birds had returned. A blackbird called from the hedge. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Everything felt normal, but I knew what I'd heard. I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. The graveyard looked the same as the night before. Still green, dotted with stones. But the grass around my tent was flattened in places. Not for me. It looked like a path, like someone had walked around it multiple times. I packed my things fast. Didn't eat, didn't drink. I just stuffed everything into my rucksack and left. I didn't look back at the graves. I didn't take a picture. I never told anyone. Not really, but that wasn't the end of it. About a week later, I was back home in Sheffield. I'd finished the trip early. I couldn't relax after that night, and I didn't feel like being in the countryside anymore. My flat felt safer, smaller, human. I was scrolling online one night, not thinking about much, and I came across a blog post from a local historian. The post was about abandoned villages in Derbyshire, small ones that had been emptied during the mid-1900s due to rail expansions, sinkholes, or flooding. Some were still standing. Others had disappeared into fields. One of them caught my eye. It was a short entry, just a paragraph and an old photo. A village named Ormsted, deserted since 1963. The reason? A sinkhole beneath the church had collapsed part of the graveyard. The village was deemed unstable. Most residents moved away. The remaining structures, including the church, were sealed off and forgotten. The photo showed the church I had camped behind. Same squat tower, same stone wall, same trees. But according to the article, the place had been abandoned for over 40 years. I sat there staring at that photo for a long time. There had been no signs of damage when I was there. The church looked old but solid. The graveyard had fresh stones, even flowers. There were no fences,
No warnings.
no indication that the village was empty. But now I wondered, had I really seen fresh graves? Or had I just assumed? Had anyone else been there at all? Or had I walked into a place no one used anymore, except for whatever still moved in the grass after dark? I never went back to check. I didn't want to know more. I haven't camped since. Even now, years later, if I hear soft steps in tall grass or the brush of something against my tent wall in a dream, I wake up sweating. And I remember that quiet place behind the old stone church, where something walked in circles around me, waiting for something I'm glad I never gave it. And the worst part? It wasn't angry. It wasn't in a rush. It was patient. I was 32 that summer, just getting out of a long job in Boise, Idaho. I'd worked as a welder for almost 11 years straight with barely a break. I don't remember exactly what pushed me to finally take a full week off, but something in my head snapped. I needed to breathe real air again, not the thick stench of burnt steel and oil. I packed up my old F-150 with the basics: tent,
Sleeping bag.
coolers, knife, hatchet, enough food to last a week. I left my phone behind on purpose. I told one friend I was going out toward the Simonside National Forest, but I didn't tell him exactly where I'd pitch my tent. That was half the point. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I wanted to be alone where I couldn't hear another engine or another voice. I took Highway 93 north for about 5 hours, turning off at a side road I'd driven down once years ago on a failed elk hunt. This time, I wasn't hunting. I just wanted to sit still for a while. The gravel road led deep into the trees, and the farther I got, the fewer tire tracks I saw. Eventually, the road narrowed into 2 ruts and then nothing. I parked on a small rise and walked in with my gear. About a mile in, I found a clearing. It wasn't big, but it looked used, not recently, but maybe in the last few years. There was a rusty old fire ring barely holding shape. Trees wrapped around the space in a horseshoe shape, and on the far end was a slope that led down to a set of abandoned train tracks. I didn't even notice the tracks until the second day. That first day, I set up camp. Nothing fancy. Tent on the flattest patch I could find. Fire pit reinforced with new stones. Water from a creek I found about 500 yards east. The night came fast and quiet. I sat out under the stars with a small fire, listening to nothing. That kind of quiet gets deep in your head. Most people think it's peaceful. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's too much. That night it felt good, though. I slept hard. The next day I explored. That's when I found the tracks. They ran parallel with the tree line, maybe 30 feet down the slope. Not active, clearly. Covered in leaves and moss, rust climbing up the rails. The kind of forgotten infrastructure that still looks solid but hasn't served a purpose in years. They gave me a weird feeling. I walked along them for a while, maybe 2 or 3 miles. Saw nothing. No signs, no markers, no old stations. Just the tracks vanishing into the forest on both ends. When I got back to camp, I noticed something small. One of my camp chairs was folded. I hadn't folded it. I told myself I must have done it without thinking. That kind of stuff happens. But it stuck in my brain. Third day, I hiked farther, past the creek and deeper into the forest. I marked trees with a knife as I went, not because I thought I'd get lost, but because I wanted a breadcrumb trail just in case. I made it up to a ridge around midday. From the top, I could just barely see the tracks winding through the trees. I took a long break, had a meal, and sat with my thoughts. I felt okay, still jumpy about that chair, but nothing else had happened. Until I got back. Another small thing. One of my water jugs was moved about 2 feet. Not spilled, not knocked over, just shifted. That's when I really started paying attention. I checked my food bins. Nothing touched. Tent was zipped. No tracks that I could find. Still, I couldn't shake it. The clearing was too quiet when I got back. Even the birds were gone. That evening, I stayed up late by the fire, watching the treeline. I didn't see anything. No movement. But that didn't mean nothing was there. Fourth day, I didn't hike. I stayed close. I built up the fire ring more, gathered wood, watched everything. Around noon, I heard something on the slope near the tracks. Not an animal, a footstep, one single crunch of a boot or shoe on dead leaves. I froze, waited, heard nothing else. I crept toward the slope, slowly using trees as cover. When I got close to the edge, I saw it. A man. He was maybe 100 feet away, standing beside the tracks, half shadowed by trees. He was facing the opposite direction, still as a statue. He wore dark clothes, black jacket, dirty jeans.
No backpack. No gear.
Just standing there like he was waiting for something. I ducked back behind a tree. My heartbeat was in my throat. I watched him for maybe 3 minutes. He never moved. Eventually, I backed away, not making a sound. I stayed close to camp the rest of the day. No fire that night. I didn't sleep much. I kept my knife in my hand in the tent. Fifth day, I packed everything. I didn't want to run in a panic, but I wasn't staying another night. I loaded my pack and hiked back toward the truck. I made it maybe half a mile before I stopped. The trail was wrong. The marks I'd carved into the trees were missing. At first I thought I was on the wrong path, but the terrain was right. The creek was there. I stood there for a long time, staring at the trees. All the knife marks were gone. The bark looked clean, like someone had come behind me and shaved the trees. Not chopped, shaved, as if they didn't want me to find my way back. I turned around, hiked back to the clearing. My pulse never dropped. I knew then I'd made a mistake going this deep without a phone or beacon. I was counting on the road to lead me out, but if I couldn't find it, I was screwed. I didn't see the man again that day, but I kept hearing little sounds from the slope, clicks, like rocks tapping. Once I heard a low whistle, not a tune, just a short note. I sat on the edge of the clearing until dark, listening. I didn't sleep in the tent that night. I buried myself under a camo tarp beneath a downed log 20 yards from the fire pit. I wanted to see if someone came. They did. Around 2 a.m., I saw a shape move through the clearing. Not quickly, just a slow walk. A man, same shape. He walked over to where my tent was, stood still for nearly 5 minutes, then circled the camp once. He paused near the fire ring, looked at my chair, then turned and walked back down the slope. I didn't sleep after that. Next morning, I tried again, picked a new direction, headed west toward the sun. I moved fast, barely stopping. After about 4 hours of hiking, I found an old service road. It was overgrown, but I followed it. 2 hours later, I hit a fence, a private ranch boundary. No sign of people, but I hopped the fence and kept going. I reached a gravel road by evening. A couple in an old RV picked me up the next day. I told them I'd gotten turned around and lost my gear in a river crossing. I didn't mention the man. I didn't tell anyone for almost a year. What stuck with me wasn't just that I'd been watched. It was the quiet, deliberate way it all happened.
No ruse. No threats.
Just movements, small and careful. Whoever that was, they didn't want to scare me off. They wanted me to stay, and they were patient. I've been back to the woods since, but never that deep, and never alone. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I remember the sound of that footstep on the leaves and the stillness of him beside the tracks. Like he belonged there, like I didn't. Sometimes at night, I lie awake thinking about how long he was watching me before I noticed. I think about the chair, the water jug, the missing knife marks on the trees. and I wonder if I would have made it out if I'd stayed just one more day. I was 34 that year, living alone in a small flat in Nottingham. It was late September 2018. The rain had already started making the air cold and wet, but I had taken a few days off work and felt restless. I needed to get out, clear my head, and just breathe in some air that didn't come from behind a radiator or a boiler vent. I've been feeling stuck lately. Same job, same walls, same dull noise of people above me walking around in their slippers. I wanted something quiet, away from everyone. That's why I packed up my camping gear and drove out to Derbyshire, near Snake Pass. I'd only been out that way a few times before, usually on hikes with mates, but this time I wanted to camp alone. There was a spot I remembered just past Lady Bower Reservoir, a little off the walking path, tucked into the trees. It wasn't part of a proper campsite, but it wasn't private land either. I figured no one would care. Besides, the forecast said light showers, nothing serious. I left late in the afternoon after grabbing a few things from Tesco. Some tins, bread, jerky, instant noodles, 2 bottles of water, and a small bottle of whiskey for the cold. I had my backpack packed already with a tent, sleeping bag, waterproof jacket, knife, lighter, and some cheap torch I'd bought off Amazon. My boots were worn but solid, and I brought 2 pairs of socks, not one. I wasn't completely stupid. By the time I reached the spot, the light was already turning gray. That part of the Peak District gets dark quick when it's cloudy. I parked off the side of the road and walked maybe 25 minutes through the woods before I found the flat patch I remembered. There were tall trees on all sides, damp moss underfoot, and a gentle slope nearby where the water trickled down into a deeper bit of the forest. You couldn't see the road from here, which is what I liked most. I pitched the tent under the trees, keeping it on the driest patch of dirt I could find. Rain had already started falling again, just a fine mist, but enough to make things slippery. I put the rainfly on tight and unrolled my sleeping bag inside, laying a folded tarp underneath to keep the cold from soaking through. Everything was wet, but not soaked. Manageable. I sat outside for a bit, under the small flap of the tent, eating cold beans out of a tin and chewing on jerky that tasted like old leather. I had my hood up and the torch resting on a rock near my foot. The sound of the rain on leaves, the smell of wet soil, the faint hiss of wind through the trees. It was peaceful, at least for the first hour. It was when the sun dipped completely and the forest turned black that I started to feel it. Something wasn't right. I camped before, alone too, but this felt different. Not loud, not even threatening. Just off. The way the wind moved, or how I kept hearing twigs snapping every now and then. Maybe animals, maybe not. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just nerves. I finished eating, had a quick swig of whiskey to warm up, then slipped into the tent and zipped it shut. Inside the tent, it was small and smelled like damp plastic. My bag sat against the side, and I kept my torch close by, already dimmer than I liked. I took off my boots and wiped my feet before sliding into the sleeping bag. The rain picked up, tapping harder on the thin fabric above me. Time passed slowly. I didn't have a phone signal, but I turned it off anyway. I didn't want the noise or distraction. I just lay there, staring up into the dark, listening. The first real sound that made me sit up was a sharp rustle. Not wind, not rain, something moving. It was a dragging sound, low and slow, like something pulling through wet leaves. I held my breath, then silence again. I waited. Nothing. I tried to lie back down, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing just beyond the tent wall. I kept imagining footsteps crunching, someone circling the tent. Around midnight, I finally heard it, clear, no mistake this time. Something stepped on a branch and it snapped clean. My hand went straight to the knife I'd left beside me. It was just a small folding one, Sharp, but not much use if someone really wanted to hurt me. Still, it was something. I turned off the torch to save the battery and just waited in the dark, holding my breath again, ears straining. Then another sound. Closer. A slow, heavy step. Not an animal. I knew how deer sounded, light, jittery. This was measured. It had weight to it. Human weight. I could hear the squish of mud under boots. I could feel it in my chest. How close it was. I stayed completely still, knife in hand, trying not to move or even blink. Then, nothing. For 10 minutes. I lay there, listening, heart pounding like it wanted out of my ribs. But there was nothing else. Just rain and wind. I thought maybe they'd gone. Maybe it was a walker lost in the woods. Maybe it was just my head messing with me. But then I saw it, the silhouette of a boot just outside the tent wall. Not even a full footstep. Just the shadow, dark and unmoving, cast by the faint glow of the torch that was still outside. Whoever it was hadn't touched the torch. They were just standing there, watching the tent. Quiet. I didn't breathe. Then the boot moved. One slow step back. Then another. Then the shadow was gone. I waited another hour, barely moving. I wanted to unzip the flap and grab the torch, but I couldn't. I was frozen. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from the sheer tension, because the next thing I remember, I woke up cold and stiff. It was still dark, still raining, but lighter now. Early morning light, that pale blue-gray that creeps in before sunrise. I peeked out of the tent, knife in hand. The torch was still there. The ground was soaked, full of leaves and mud. I grabbed the torch and looked around.
No footprints.
The rain had probably wiped them away. I didn't eat. I didn't even lace my boots properly. I just packed everything up as fast as I could, stuffing the tent, sleeping bag, food, all of it into the sack without care. My back hurt from sleeping wrong, and my fingers were shaking. Not from the cold. The walk back to the car was slow. Everything felt too quiet.
No birds. No rustling.
Just rain. When I finally got back to the road, my car was exactly where I'd left it, but the back window was covered in streaks of mud. At first I thought it was just splatter from the road, but then I saw it clearly, 3 long smears like someone had dragged muddy fingers across the glass. Not random, not splashed, deliberate. I looked around. Nobody, no other cars, no houses for miles. I got in, locked the doors, and drove straight back to Nottingham. Didn't stop once, not even for fuel or food. When I got home, I checked everything. All my gear was there. Nothing was stolen. But the thought kept eating at me. Who was out there that night? And what did they want? A few days later, I went to wash my jacket, and I noticed something on the back, near the hood. Cut, thin but clean, like a knife had slid across it while it was hanging up. I hadn't heard anyone come into the tent, but maybe I wouldn't have. I never went camping alone again after that, and I never drove past Lady Bower at night again either. Some things don't need answers. Some things are enough just to survive. I was 28 years old when I went camping alone in Northumberland. It was early September of 2013, the kind of time in the year when summer hadn't fully let go. But the early signs of autumn were starting to show. The leaves weren't turning yet, but the mornings were crisp, and you could feel something different in the air. I had a week off work, no major plans, and for a long time I'd wanted to just disappear into the woods for a few nights. Clear my head, get away from everything, be completely off-grid. I chose a spot just off the Simonside hills, not far from Rothbury. I'd been there before briefly with a friend during a road trip, but this time I planned to hike in a bit deeper, find somewhere away from paths and people. I had a proper tent, stove, warm gear, and enough supplies for 4 nights. I didn't plan to move around. I just wanted stillness. To sit beside a fire, read, and be quiet. I parked the car in a small pull-in along a forestry road, slung my pack on, and headed off the path. The plan was simple. Head west through the forest, veer toward a small stream I saw on the map, and find somewhere flat to pitch the tent. Took me about 2 hours to reach the spot I'd picked. It was flat, mossy, with tall pine trees surrounding it. The stream wasn't far off, maybe a 3-minute walk, and there was no sign of anyone. No litter, no old fire pits, nothing. That was exactly what I wanted. I set up the tent, gathered firewood, boiled some water, and just sat there that first evening, staring into the trees. Felt right. Felt like I had finally shut out the world. That night was uneventful. I woke up a few times to the sound of owls or whined through the trees, but nothing strange. The air got cold around 3 or 4 a.m., and I had to bury myself deeper into the sleeping bag. Morning came slow, and the light through the trees woke me naturally. I didn't check the time. I liked not knowing. On the second day, I spent a lot of time just walking around the area, short hikes without the heavy pack. I followed the stream north, saw a few old tree stumps, a rabbit hole, some old plastic fencing that was half rotted away. It was peaceful. I saw no signs of people.
No boot prints, no rapes.
Even the birds seemed calmer than usual. But something shifted late that afternoon. I was walking back toward my tent after collecting water from the stream when I noticed something off. Nothing dramatic, just something small. A pile of stones beside the base of a tree, 6 of them stacked carefully. At first I thought it was just natural, the kind of thing kids do, but there weren't any kids around. There weren't any people around, and I hadn't seen it there the day before. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe I hadn't noticed it, or maybe it had been there, and I just didn't care until I was on edge. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it for a moment, then kept walking. Still, I glanced back once. Something about the way the stones leaned slightly to one side, like someone had carefully adjusted them to look almost natural. That night, as I sat by the fire, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was stupid, really, just some stones. But once your brain has a thread to pull, it doesn't let go. I scanned the trees more than usual that evening. I kept listening for movement, but the forest stayed quiet. Around 11 p.m., I crawled into the tent, zipped up, and tried to sleep. I don't know what time I woke up. It was pitch black. My eyes opened slowly to silence, and at first I didn't know why I was awake. But then I heard something. Footsteps. Not fast, not slow, just steady, crunching through the brush. Light like someone trying not to be loud. I froze. It wasn't an animal. I knew that much. You can tell the difference between a badger scuttling through the undergrowth and a person walking upright. It had rhythm. Hail tutu. Deliberate. The footsteps stopped, and I waited. My breathing got louder. My heart thumped hard against the sleeping bag. I didn't move. I didn't even sit up. I just lay there, every muscle tensed, ears straining. Nothing. Minutes passed. I must have drifted off again, or stayed frozen for so long that it blurred into sleep. Either way, the next time I woke up, it was light out. Early morning again. Dew on the tent fly, the smell of wet moss. I climbed out slowly, checking around. Nothing looked disturbed.
No marks, no boot prints.
I even walked the perimeter, looking for anything that would prove to me I hadn't just imagined it. Then I saw something that made my stomach turn. The pile of stones I saw the day before. It was gone. In its place, a new pile. Same number of stones. Different spot. This time closer to my tent. Maybe 20 paces away. I stood there, staring at it, wind moving softly through the trees. I felt watched, not in a paranoid way, in a real, raw way, like someone was behind one of those trees, staring back. I kicked the stones over, hard, scattered them. I didn't want to see them again. Whatever this was, a prank, a coincidence, I was done with it. I spent the rest of the day with my knife clipped to my belt. I went further out that time, trying to find any sign of another camp or people. I walked toward a hill about a mile west, climbed it, and scanned the forest. Nothing, just green and brown. No smoke, no movement. That night, I built a bigger fire. I kept it going until nearly midnight. Every sound in the trees made my ears twitch. I didn't drink tea like the nights before. I didn't read. I just sat on the log and stared out. Eventually, I crawled into the tent again, leaving the fire smoldering low. I barely slept. Just after 2 a.m., I heard movement again. Closer this time. The same crunching of steps, slow, careful. Then a snap. A twig, somewhere behind the tent. Not right behind, but close enough that I could tell it wasn't far. Maybe 30 feet away. I slid my hand over to my knife, still in the side pocket of the tent. I didn't unzip. I didn't move. I just waited, listening. Then it went quiet again, and stayed that way. I didn't sleep after that. I waited until the sky began to lighten, then got out of the tent. I didn't pack anything. I just walked a slow circle around my camp. That's when I saw him, about 50 feet away, on the edge of a slight rise in the ground, between two large trees. A man, just standing there. He wasn't moving. He wasn't holding anything. He just stared in my direction. He was tall, lean, wearing a brown coat, the kind that looked like it had seen a lot of years. Maybe canvas or oilskin. He had something slung across his back. Couldn't tell if it was a rolled tarp or a pack. His face wasn't clearly visible, partly in shadow under a cap or hood. I froze. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour, but was probably less than 10 seconds. Then he turned and walked away.
No rush.
Just disappeared slowly into the trees. I didn't chase him. I didn't call out. I just stood there, stomach twisted into a knot. It wasn't just the fact that he was there. It was the way he didn't do anything. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me, didn't try to talk. Just stood, then left. I packed everything. Fast. Threw things into my bag without folding, without strapping properly. Fire still smoldering, tent half damp. I hiked out hard and fast, straight line back toward the car. Didn't follow the stream, didn't stick to trails. Every 10 minutes I stopped to listen. Once I thought I heard something behind me, more footsteps, but it could have been anything. Could have been the blood in my ears, could have been wind, but I didn't stop again. When I got to the road, I could see my car in the pull-in. No one else around. I threw the gear in the boot, jumped in, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't stop until I was back on the A1 heading south. I never went back. I didn't tell many people. A few friends asked why I never camped again, and I just said I grew out of it. But I never forgot the man, the silence, the stones. I don't know what he was doing out there, or how long he'd been nearby, watching, walking, maybe nothing. Maybe it was all in my head, but I'll never believe that fully, not after seeing him. There's a lot of space out there, woods, hills, little patches of earth that people forget about. And sometimes, in those forgotten places, there's someone else already living quiet. Someone who doesn't want to be seen. Someone who watches not because they're curious, but because you're in their place. And they're just waiting for you to leave. It was the summer of 2014 when I decided to take a long break from my usual work routine. I was 27 then, living alone in Sheffield, and working night shifts in a printing warehouse. The work wasn't bad, but the late hours had turned me into a shell. I was always tired, never really present. My social life had faded, and even on weekends, all I wanted was sleep and silence. That July, I asked for a week off and made a plan to spend it camping. I didn't want any of the usual spots people flooded to. No crowded campgrounds, no loud kids running around, no overly manicured caravan parks. I wanted isolation. I wanted to hear my own thoughts for once. After some digging, I found a place on an old forum for wild camping enthusiasts. Someone had mentioned a forgotten graveyard just outside of Westerdale, tucked away on a patch of moorland that barely showed up on newer maps. They said the graveyard had no locked gate, no caretaker, no lights, just a few crooked headstones, iron fencing lost in weeds, and dense trees on 3 sides. It sounded like exactly what I needed. I took the train up to Castleton and hiked from there. I brought my old army green rucksack, the same one I'd had since college, packed with a one-man tent, canned food, a hand-cranked torch, a knife, a metal cup, 2 bottles of water, and my sleeping bag rolled tight and clipped to the top. It was about a 4-hour walk through farmland and faint trails until I got to the spot. The sky was dull gray with streaks of orange in the west by the time I saw the twisted iron gate of the graveyard. Its hinges rusted solid and the gate itself leaning like it was tired of standing. You couldn't even read the wooden sign nailed to a tree nearby. Moss had claimed it. I stepped through a gap in the gate and saw about a dozen gravestones scattered around, most of them chipped or sinking. They were old, worn smooth in some places. No fresh flowers, no new earth, nothing that said people still came here. The graveyard was maybe the size of a tennis court, with tall trees and thorny brush growing thick beyond the fence. I picked a spot at the edge of the grounds, about 15 feet from the nearest headstone, and started setting up camp. The ground was soft and uneven, but dry enough. Once the tent was up, I warmed a tin of beans with a camping stove and ate slowly, watching the light fade. The quiet was real, not silence. There were birds and the faint sound of wind brushing through branches. But there was no engine noise, no voices, nothing artificial. I felt a weight fall off my shoulders. This was what I'd needed. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 10. I left the rain cover off the tent so I could see the trees silhouetted against the sky. For the first time in months, I drifted off quickly. It must have been sometime around 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up. It was dark, but not pitch black. The moon was half full, and the sky was clear. My body was cold even inside the bag, and I had that odd feeling where you wake up without a clear reason.
No dreams, no noise.
Just suddenly conscious. I didn't move at first, just lay there and listened. I could hear the wind, but it had slowed. A branch creaked now and then I heard something else. Not far off, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. It was a sharp, deliberate sound, not an animal. It sounded like metal scraping metal, but duller, faint. I thought maybe it was the wind rattling the old iron gate. But when I sat up and unzipped the tent door to look out, I could see the gate clearly from where I was. It wasn't moving. I stayed still and watched. There was no movement, no sound now. I figured maybe I'd imagined it or something shifted under a stone or tree root nearby. That kind of place had to be full of strange noises if you weren't used to it. After about 10 minutes of silence, I lay back down and zipped the tent up again. I kept the torch near my head and closed my eyes. The next thing I remember was waking up again at dawn, sore but rested. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. I stepped outside and stretched. The dew had settled heavily during the night, and my boots were wet from condensation. I walked the length of the graveyard, not really looking at the names, just feeling the morning. I boiled water for tea, sat on the ground next to my tent, and watched as mist started to rise from the moor beyond the trees. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. By mid-morning, I decided to explore the area beyond the graveyard. There was a vague footpath behind the tallest oak tree, leading into thicker woods. I followed it for maybe half a mile, just wandering. Found a stone wall mostly collapsed, a dry stream bed, and what looked like the frame of an old wooden bench overtaken by moss. Whoever had maintained this place had stopped long ago. On the way back, I noticed something odd. Near the edge of the graveyard, by the iron fencing, someone or something had disturbed the ground. A patch of earth about 2 feet wide had been scraped at. Not dug up completely, just clawed at or moved. The grass was uprooted, dirt loose, and a chunk of broken brick was half buried nearby. It didn't feel right, but I couldn't make sense of it. I stayed again that night. I didn't want to pack up after just one night. This time I was more alert going to sleep. I kept the knife close, and my boots just inside the tent door. I felt fine mostly, a little uneasy, but nothing serious. People lived near woods and graveyards all the time. That night, it took longer to fall asleep. The wind had picked up, and my tent swayed slightly. At some point, I must have drifted off, but I woke again at around 3 a.m. This time, it wasn't quiet. I heard movement, close, not constant but clear, crunching, the soft kind of sound boots make on dry grass and leaves. I didn't move. My heart was pounding. I lay there frozen, holding my breath. The steps moved slowly, coming from the far end of the graveyard, maybe near the largest grave marker. Then they stopped. No talking.
No breathing.
Just a stop. I counted. 20 seconds. 30. Then the sound of movement again. Softer this time, going back the way it came. When I finally dared to unzip the tent and peek out, I saw nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I packed up. I'd had enough. It wasn't terror. I wasn't convinced someone was trying to hurt me, but something wasn't right out there. I needed to go. As I folded the tent, I saw something lying under a clump of grass near the grave I'd heard the sounds from. I pulled it out. It was a rusted chisel, covered in mud. The handle was worn down, blackened by age and use. I couldn't tell if it was recently dropped or if it had been there for years. I didn't touch it again, just left it there and finished packing. I hiked back through the trees and toward the road that would eventually lead to the village. It wasn't until I got near the farmland that I saw someone, an older man in a coat, walking along a fence line. I didn't say anything. I just kept moving. When I got back to Sheffield, I spent days trying to shake off the feeling. I couldn't stop thinking about the scraping noise, the chisel, the disturbed earth. It was all too specific to be random. Something or someone was going out there at night. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched local news archives. I went back years, looking for anything about that graveyard, that stretch of moorland, any name I could remember from the stones. Nothing about deaths or crimes. But in a small corner of a 1989 local paper, I found a brief note about the site. It said the plot had once been used as a resting place for paupers, bodies buried without headstones. There had been a short controversy in the 60s when someone reported seeing a man digging at night, claiming he was restoring markers. Police found nothing, but fencing was added. I never went back. To this day, I still think about that sound. Metal against stone, then footsteps, slow and unhurried. Someone still visits that place, for reasons I don't want to understand. I just hope they didn't notice I was there. I was 34 that year, and I was going through a stretch of life that just felt flat. I'd split from my girlfriend the winter before. No real drama. Just two people who got tired of sitting in the same living room pretending to like each other. My work was quiet too, freelance CAD contracts from home. Good money but isolating. I lived in a small flat in Leicester, and the walls started to feel like they were shrinking around me. I wasn't sleeping much, wasn't seeing friends, and I knew I needed to get away from the routine. Not a holiday exactly. I just needed something that wasn't the same 4 rooms and the same 4 streets. That's how I ended up loading up my car with my old camping gear and heading north toward the Peak District. It was early August, the middle of a particularly hot and dry stretch of summer. My plan was to go for 3 nights, maybe 4. I picked a quiet, less traveled area near a disused limestone quarry outside a village called Middleton by Wirksworth. It wasn't marked on any of the standard tourist maps, but I'd found it years before while doing a short hike through the area. I remembered it being eerie but oddly peaceful. It wasn't fenced off or anything, just abandoned. That kind of in-between land that no one seems to own anymore. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. Just left a note for my mate Jack saying I'd gone camping, and I'd call him by Friday. That was it. I packed a tent, a cooler with food, a small fold-out chair, my boots, my knife, 2 torches, and a few books. No laptop, no phone signal where I was going. The drive took just over 2 hours. I parked on a side road near the tree line and hiked the rest of the way in about 25 minutes with a full pack. The sun was still high when I reached the spot I'd remembered, just at the edge of the quarry. It was strange, standing there again after almost a decade. The place had a dead feel to it. No birds, no wind through the trees. Just still air and the sharp, pale stone walls of the quarry dropping off like a pit into the earth. I pitched my tent on a narrow patch of grass about 30 feet from the edge. There was a bit of a clearing, enough for a small fire, though I didn't plan to use one. I unpacked, set up, and walked around the area a bit. The quarry was dry, maybe 70 feet deep, full of broken rocks and wild weeds, with a couple of rusted metal beams that used to be part of some structure long gone. There was an old path that looked like it had been used by bikes or scramblers at some point, but there were no fresh tire tracks.
No litter.
No signs of anyone having been there in months, maybe years. By evening, I was sitting on my little chair, watching the sky darken. It was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy, unnatural kind. The air felt wrong somehow. I noticed that even insects weren't buzzing around like they usually do in August. Still, I tried not to overthink it. I opened a beer, read a bit, and crawled into my tent before midnight. The first night passed without anything happening. Just the sound of the occasional twig snapping outside, which is normal when you're alone in the woods. I didn't sleep great, but I never do on the first night out. The second day, I hiked up to the top of the ridge above the quarry. It was a dry, bright morning. From up there, I could see for miles. No signs of anyone, not a single hiker. I went further out, looking for any old structures or caves in the rocks, but found nothing useful. I sat up there for a bit, drinking water, feeling like the only person in that whole stretch of forest. On the way back down, I noticed something strange. A rabbit carcass, freshly dead. It hadn't been eaten. No blood. It was just lying there on its side in the grass. Its eyes were gone, cleanly removed, but there were no signs of a struggle, no fur torn off, nothing. Just like it dropped dead and someone scooped the eyes out with a spoon. That bothered me. I kept walking faster than before. When I got back to camp, everything was where I left it. But something didn't feel right. It's hard to explain. My tent zipper was still shut, my pack untouched, but the cooler was sitting slightly off its original position. Just a few inches. Enough to notice if you're paying attention. I opened it. Nothing missing, but a bottle of water I swear I didn't put on top was now lying right at the top of the pile. I told myself I must have done it in a hurry and forgotten. That was the only logical explanation. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling. The one where your skin feels tight and your stomach goes hollow for no reason. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing faint shuffling sounds outside the tent. Not footsteps, not animal movement, just dragging. Sometimes it stopped and didn't start again for hours. By the third morning, I had decided I was going to leave early. I'd only planned for one more night anyway, and I didn't want to stay longer than necessary. I made tea, packed away most of my stuff, and left the tent up for one final night. Around midday, I went for another short hike in a different direction, toward an old rail track that cut through part of the woods. I didn't stay out long. I kept glancing over my shoulder. I felt watched, though I didn't see anyone. The kind of feeling that eats at your back and won't let you enjoy the moment. When I got back to camp around 2 p.m., the tent zipper was open. That froze me in place. I stood for a good minute, just staring at it. My pack was inside. The cooler was outside where I'd left it, but the tent flap had definitely been zipped shut when I left. I checked it twice before heading out. I walked up slowly, like it might be a trap. I peered inside. Everything was still there.
Sleeping bag.
Book, my torch. Nothing looked stolen or moved, but something had definitely been inside. I could smell it. That sour, sweaty smell you get from a body that hasn't washed in days. Not strong, just faint, but it was there. I stepped back, turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. No one. The rest of the afternoon, I sat near the tent with my knife in my hand, listening.
No birds.
No wind, just that thick, heavy stillness again. At one point, I thought I saw movement in the trees. A flicker of something pale and narrow darting behind the trunks. Too far to make out. I stood up, squinted. Nothing. I waited, but the shape didn't return. I made the decision to leave at first light. That night was worse. I kept my torch on and my boots laced. I lay in my sleeping bag fully clothed, with the knife resting on my chest. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again. The dragging, closer this time. It circled the tent slowly, scraping softly through the grass. I didn't move. I just stared at the top of the tent, heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. Then it stopped. Total silence. I stayed frozen like that for hours. At some point just before dawn, I finally fell into a light, horrible sleep. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was a small stone on top of my sleeping bag. Smooth, round, gray. I hadn't brought it in. That was it for me. I packed up in 10 minutes, didn't even roll the tent, just stuffed it in the boot of the car. I hiked out fast, sweating hard, checking over my shoulder constantly. Every snapped twig made me flinch. Every shift of wind through the leaves sounded like footsteps. When I reached the road and saw my car, I almost ran. As I drove away, I noticed something that made my chest tighten all over again. Mud prints on the back window of my car. Thin, long prints, like someone had dragged their fingers down the glass. 5 long streaks, not a hand, just lines. I didn't stop, didn't get out. I drove straight back to Leicester and didn't speak a word to anyone about it for over a year. I never went back to that place, never even looked it up online. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that stone on my chest. I think about that smell inside my tent, and I wonder how long it was standing there before I woke up, just watching me sleep. The only reason I'm writing this now is because last week, someone posted a drone video of that quarry on YouTube, a hiking channel, bright sunny footage shot last month. I clicked, watched a few seconds. My chest went cold when I saw it. At the edge of the quarry, right near where my tent had been, someone had stacked a small ring of stones in a circle. Right in the middle was a smooth gray rock, almost perfectly round. It didn't mean anything to anyone else, just part of the scenery, but I knew what it was, and I never want to see it again. It was October 2017 when I decided to take a solo hunting trip into the Ozarks. I was 34 at the time, recently divorced and trying to clear my head after a string of bad months. I grew up hunting with my dad in northern Arkansas, and the mountains had always been a quiet place for me. I figured a few days out in the woods, away from people, phones, and all the noise of life, would do me some good. I picked a remote stretch of forest about 30 miles south of Jasper. I'd studied the area online and checked topo maps for high ridges and creeks. The spot I chose was tucked off a fire service road that hadn't been maintained in years. I had to park my truck about a mile away from the trailhead because downed trees blocked the road. That alone should have been a warning, but I was stubborn. I was used to hiking and carrying gear, and it just made the place feel even more secluded. The air was cool, low 50s during the day and dipping into the upper 30s at night. The leaves were already turning deep orange and red, and everything had that dry, brittle smell of fall. I had my .30-06, a decent tent, a water filter, dehydrated food, and a small wood stove. I brought a trail cam too, just to see what kind of game passed through at night. I hiked in about 4 miles and set up camp on a small shelf just above a dry creek bed. The elevation was good for spotting, and the area had signs of deer, rubs on trees, tracks in the soft mud along the creek, even some old scat. I pitched my tent, got the stove working, and spent the rest of the day hiking ridges and scouting. I didn't see anything that first evening, but I wasn't too worried. It usually took a day or two of sitting still for the animals to stop noticing you. That night, I sat by the fire with my rifle beside me, sipping instant coffee. I didn't see any planes overhead, didn't hear any cars in the distance. Just the wind moving through the trees and the occasional crack of branches somewhere deeper in the woods. Normal forest sounds. But right around midnight, something didn't feel right. I woke up cold and stiff. Even though I'd zipped my bag all the way up, I'd heard a noise. Something quick, light, and close to the tent. I sat up, heart thumping, and listened. Nothing for a minute, just silence. Then I heard it again, like a single step on dry leaves. Then another, but farther off. Probably a raccoon or coyote, I told myself. Still, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, and everything looked empty. I scanned around, saw nothing, and eventually went back to sleep. But I kept the rifle next to me after that. The next morning, I checked around camp. No tracks, no signs of anything unusual. I made some oatmeal, packed my gear, and went higher up the ridge to a rocky outcrop I'd seen the day before. It overlooked a wide valley and gave me good sight lines. I sat there from dawn until mid-afternoon with my scope, watching, waiting. I finally spotted a doe around 2 p.m., but I let her go. I was hoping for a buck. An hour later, I saw movement again, but it wasn't a deer. It was a man. He was on the opposite ridge, maybe 600 yards away, moving slow through the trees, barely visible. He was wearing dark clothes and a backpack. Struck me as odd. Not because people don't hike out there, plenty do, but because of how he moved. He wasn't walking like a hiker. He kept crouching, stopping, and standing still for long periods. It almost looked like he was watching something. I pulled out my binoculars and tried to get a better look, but he slipped behind a boulder and didn't come out again. I waited for 20 minutes and finally gave up. I told myself he was probably just another hunter. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing little cracks, faint rustling. Once, I swore I heard breathing low and steady, not more than a few feet from the tent. But when I unzipped the flap and shone my light, nothing was there. The air smelled like pine and dry dirt. No signs of anything. The next morning, I hiked down the creek bed. I was thinking about relocating camp closer to water. As I moved along the banks, I noticed something strange. In the mud, just past a bend in the creek, I found a boot print. Not mine. Too big. The tread was different too. Heavy sole, square toe. Work boots, maybe. I checked the direction. They were headed toward my camp. I followed them for a bit, just curious. They disappeared once they hit the dry leaves again. But it wasn't the only thing I saw. About 20 yards from the print, tucked into a hollow in the roots of a big oak tree, I found something else. A crushed can of beans. Not fresh, rusted, old. But not too old. Maybe weeks, Someone else had camped here recently. Again, not totally unheard of. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. By the third night, the woods didn't feel the same. The silence was different, heavier. The birds that chirped earlier in the evening had gone quiet. I didn't build a fire that night. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat inside my tent, listening with the rifle in my lap and the safety off. Around 1 a.m., I heard a branch snap. Not a twig, a thick, dry branch. Then silence. Then another. Closer this time. I eased up, unzipped the flap an inch, and peeked out. I couldn't see anything at first. Then, off to my left, I caught movement. A shape, tall and narrow, standing just behind a tree. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would drown out the silence. I froze. The shape didn't move. For a long time, maybe 5 minutes, it just stood there. Then it turned. Slowly. I could barely make out the head turning toward me. Then it stepped behind the tree and disappeared. I stayed up until sunrise. Didn't sleep. Didn't move. To first light, I packed everything up. I wasn't thinking about hunting anymore. I just wanted out. I took a long route back, avoiding the creek bed and ridges. I stuck to low brush, kept the rifle in my hands, and didn't stop for anything. By noon, I reached the fire road where I'd parked the truck. But when I rounded the last bend, my stomach dropped. There were tire tracks in the mud. Fresh, deep. My truck was still there, but someone else had been there too. I walked around it, checked everything. No windows broken, no scratches. But on the hood, pressed into the dust, was a handprint. Perfect, full palm and 5 fingers. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. The print was big, bigger than mine. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't look back. I drove straight to a gas station in Harrison, used the payphone, and called a friend to let them know I was coming over. I didn't tell them everything, just that something felt wrong. I needed to stay the night. I never went back to that part of the woods again. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through a local hunting forum when I saw a post that stopped me cold. A guy had uploaded trail cam footage from somewhere near Jasper, probably 20 miles from where I was camped. In the video, taken at night, a man walks right up to the camera. He's wearing a dark hoodie, no backpack, no gear, just staring into the lens. His face was smeared with something, dirt or ash maybe, and his eyes looked wide, empty. The timestamp was 2 days after I left the woods. The guy who uploaded it was asking if anyone recognized him. Nobody did. That trip changed how I see the forest. I still hunt, but I don't go alone anymore. I don't stray off marked trails. And I always check my surroundings before I sleep. Not because of bears or mountain lions, because of people. The woods aren't empty. You just don't always see who else is out there. I wasn't new to the outdoors. I'd done over a decade of solo backpacking trips across the western United States. I liked the quiet, the physical grind, and the simplicity of it all. The Wind River Range in Wyoming had been on my list for a while. Less crowded than the Tetons or Yosemite, but just as rugged and beautiful. I decided on a 5-day solo trip along a loop trail that would take me through alpine meadows, up into rocky ridges, and deep into pine forests. It wasn't the hardest route, but it was remote, exactly how I liked it. I parked my truck at a small gravel lot off a forest road, about an hour from the nearest town, Lander. I signed the trail register, packed light but smart, and headed out early in the morning. The sky was clear and the air still had that crisp morning bite. My pack was about 35 pounds, tent, sleeping bag, small stove, bear spray, and food in a hard canister. I carried a topographic map and a GPS, but no phone. There was no signal out there anyway. The first day was uneventful. Long stretches of pine forest, distant views of granite peaks, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush that always made me pause. Chipmunks, probably. I made it about 9 miles in before I set up camp near a small alpine lake. There was no one around, no boot prints, no broken branches, no campfire rings. Just the sound of water lapping the rocky shore and the steady wind in the trees. That night I slept well. It got cold, but nothing unusual for early summer in the mountains. The second day, I pushed another 10 miles up into a pass that offered a panoramic view of the whole valley below. I took my time, ate lunch sitting on a warm rock, and snapped a few photos with my cheap point and shoot. By late afternoon, I was descending into thicker forest again. I chose a small clearing well off the trail, near a stream, and set up camp just before dark. I didn't build a fire, I rarely did. Fires attract attention. That night is when things started to get strange. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. No sounds had startled me, just a strange feeling. Like I'd been yanked from a dream and my body knew something was off before my brain did. I stayed still, listening. No wind.
No bugs.
Nothing. It was too quiet. Usually, even at night, you can hear owls or something moving in the brush. I sat up in my sleeping bag, ears tuned to the silence. Then I heard it far off, maybe 50 yards from the tent. A single, slow footstep. Not an animal stepping lightly or crashing through the forest. Just one step, then nothing. I didn't move. I just listened. Another step. Closer. Deliberate. Then another. But no breathing. No crunch of twigs underfoot. Just soft, padded steps like something walking barefoot on dirt. After about 10 minutes, it stopped. I sat up for another hour, bear spray in my hand, staring into the dark, but I didn't hear anything else. By morning, I convinced myself it was a deer or maybe a black bear nosing around. They don't usually sneak, but animals do weird things. I packed up early and hiked out quickly. The trail took me higher again, into exposed terrain where the trees thinned out. I felt better with open sky above me. That afternoon, maybe 10 miles into the third day, I came across something I hadn't expected. Fresh boot prints. But something about them was wrong. They were spaced too wide apart and pointed at strange angles. The heel was deep, like someone had been dragging their foot. They weren't mine, and they hadn't been there the day before. I followed the prints for a bit, curious. They didn't follow the trail. They crossed it, then veered off into dense brush. I let them go. I had no interest in tracking someone through the woods, especially not someone who moved like that. Later that night, I camped near a rocky outcrop that gave me a little shelter from the wind. I slept with my knife out, something I rarely did. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. Around midnight, I heard the noise again. This time it was closer. Same slow, soft steps. But now I could tell it wasn't walking normally. The steps would stop for minutes at a time, then start again. Sometimes circling, sometimes moving away and then back again. I stayed dead still, heart pounding, holding my breath when it got too loud. I was sure it knew I was in the tent. Then it did something that still makes my skin crawl. It mimicked the sound of a person clearing their throat. Not loud, not perfect, but enough. Just a dry, scraping sound, like someone trying to imitate a noise they'd heard before. Not an animal sound. It wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I found footprints again. Same wide gait, same dragging heel. They circled the tent. Twice. I thought about hiking straight out, cutting my trip short, but I was 2 days from the trailhead either way. I figured I'd keep going, finish the loop, and try not to stop moving until I was back to my truck. On the fourth day, it started raining around noon. Light at first, then a steady cold drizzle. I pushed hard that day, covering more miles than I planned. I didn't want to set up camp in the dark. Around 6 in the evening, I found a natural overhang in a rock wall that would give me some protection from the rain. I set up the tent beneath it and ate a cold dinner. I kept thinking about the prints, the footsteps, that noise. Before I zipped up the tent, I scanned the forest again. Nothing, but I felt watched, like something just out of sight was standing perfectly still, waiting. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The steps started around 3 a.m., but this time they were faster and closer.
No hesitaschen. No brax.
Something moved past the tent, fast but controlled, like it wanted me to know it was there. I gripped the bear spray in one hand and the knife in the other. I didn't breathe. Then it stopped moving. I waited. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. Then, just as I started to think it had gone, I heard something even worse. It let out a low groan, not an animal growl, a human sound, almost like pain, or maybe effort, like someone trying to lift something heavy while keeping quiet. I stayed frozen until daylight. When the sun rose, I packed up in minutes and started hiking out. I didn't eat. I didn't stop. I followed the loop trail back toward the lot. I was about 14 miles out. I pushed hard, my legs burning, lungs tight. Every time I stopped to breathe, I felt like something was catching up. I didn't hear it anymore, but that was almost worse. Silence had returned. That same thick, dead silence from 2 nights before. By early evening, I saw the dirt road. My truck was still there, untouched. The relief I felt stepping out of the trees and seeing it parked where I left it nearly dropped me to my knees. I didn't look back once as I threw my gear in the bed and climbed in. I drove the forest road as fast as I dared. Windshield streaked with leftover rain and mud. By the time I hit the highway, my hands were shaking. I didn't report anything. Who would I tell? Something followed me in the woods, and it might have been pretending to be a person. No one would take that seriously, and I wasn't even sure what I'd say. I never saw a face, never heard a voice, just those steps, that mimicry, that slow, creeping feeling of being watched by something that understood just enough to scare me, but not enough to feel human. I haven't gone camping alone since. Even now, almost 12 years later, I still don't sleep right. Some nights, I wake up convinced I hear those same slow, deliberate steps outside the window. They never get closer. They never speak. But I know what I heard, and I know it wasn't just an animal. It was something pretending to be a man, and it almost got good at it. My name is Sean. Back in the summer of 2013, I was 28 years old, living in Southwest Oregon. I was doing well enough working for a local utility company, mostly just maintaining lines and assisting on pole inspections. I wasn't married, no kids, just a little apartment near Grants Pass and a beat-up Toyota pickup that had seen better days. What I did have, though, was time. And when summer hit, I liked to take a few days off and just go out into the woods. I wasn't a hardcore outdoorsman or survivalist or anything like that, but I liked the quiet. I liked waking up to birds instead of traffic. I liked being alone. That year, I chose a spot that wasn't listed on any big camping websites. It wasn't an official campground. No signs, no rangers, no fire rings or outhouses. Just a clearing deep in the Klamath Mountains, a place I'd found a couple years earlier while helping a buddy scout hunting trails. He told me nobody ever goes there, and he was right. It was almost like a small meadow tucked between ridges, with a gentle slope leading down to a stream. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never see it. I packed up for a 4-day trip: tent, cooler, folding chair, sleeping bag, couple changes of clothes, some canned food, jerky, a small hatchet, 2 knives, my .22 pistol just in case, and one of those big plastic water containers with a spout. I left my phone in the truck, which I parked about a half-mile from the spot. No reception out there anyway. Took me about an hour to hike in. Nothing too difficult, just a bit of a steep patch here and there. The spot looked just like I remembered, untouched. Soft ground, open sky, shaded edges. I set up my tent on the north side of the clearing, near a big tree stump that I used like a table. I gathered firewood, built a small pit with stones, cracked open a can of chili, and kicked back. The first night was fine, cold but quiet. I slept deep and didn't wake once. The second day was easy too. I wandered around a bit, did some reading, sharpened my hatchet just for something to do. Even spotted some deer prints down by the stream. I didn't feel uneasy or watched or anything like that. It was peaceful. But late into that second night, something changed. I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. I wasn't sure what woke me, but I was sweating even though it was cold. The kind of sweat that comes from a bad dream, except I couldn't remember dreaming. I sat up in the tent, unzipped the flap, and looked outside. Nothing, just trees, the faint outline of the stump in the moonlight, and the hiss of the wind. Still, I felt off. I stepped outside to take a leak and stretched a bit. That's when I noticed something. The fire pit had been moved. Not far, maybe just 2 or 3 feet, but it wasn't where I had left it. The ring of stones was broken on one side, and a few of the logs were lying outside the circle, like they'd been kicked or shoved. I hadn't heard anything in the night. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I stood there staring at it, too tired to be scared yet. I told myself maybe an animal came through and sniffed around, maybe a bear or a raccoon. But the stones were heavy. I remembered stacking them tight so the fire wouldn't spread. Something strong would have had to move them. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. I stayed in the tent, one hand on the pistol, just listening. But nothing came back. Nothing made a sound. The next morning, I checked the area around the fire pit. No prints, no scratches, no signs of animal fur or tracks. The ground was soft. Any movement should have left something, but there was nothing. I debated packing up right then, but the sun was up and everything looked normal. I convinced myself I was overreacting, so I stayed. The third day dragged on. I tried to relax, but I kept watching the tree line. I didn't wander far. I kept the pistol in my waistband the whole time. I didn't light a fire that evening. Just ate some jerky and an apple and sat there in the quiet. I kept listening. At one point, I thought I heard something moving just beyond the trees, maybe 50 yards out, but it was faint, like a single twig snapping and then silence. I stayed still for what felt like an hour. That night, I didn't go into the tent. I sat with my back against the stump, pistol in my hand, watching the fire pit and the woods beyond it. Around midnight, I saw it. Not a person, not clearly, just movement. Someone or something was standing at the edge of the clearing behind the trees. It wasn't close enough for me to make out a face or details, but it wasn't a bear. It was tall, lean, still. It just stood there. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I waited. After what felt like 10 minutes, it slowly stepped back into the woods and disappeared. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for a while. I stayed there, gripping the pistol, waiting for it to come back. It never did. Not that night. When the sun came up, I packed everything in 5 minutes flat. I shoved the tent into the pack without folding it, grabbed everything I could carry, and hiked out. When I reached the truck, something else was off. The back of the truck bed had been opened. Not broken into, just opened. And someone had taken the plastic water container and slashed it with a knife. Deep, jagged cuts all the way through, like they were trying to destroy it, not steal it. My phone was still there, everything else untouched. I didn't wait around to think about it. I got in, turned the key, and drove until I hit pavement again. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not friends, not coworkers. Not for a long time. When I did, I left out details. I didn't want to sound crazy. Maybe I still do. But something was out there. Someone. The weirdest part was when I went back. 6 months later, just to prove to myself it wasn't in my head, I couldn't find the clearing. Not just, I couldn't remember the path. I mean, the whole area was different. I walked the ridgeline, checked the landmarks, followed the same route, but the slope was gone. The stream was there, but it curved differently. It was like the land had changed, or I'd never been there in the first place. But I had. I remembered every inch of it. I remembered that stump, that ring of stones, that shape at the edge of the trees. I haven't camped alone since. It was early June of 2016 when I decided to take a short break from everything. I was living in Oklahoma City back then, working long shifts at a warehouse near the airport. I was 29, tired, and needed a few days alone. A guy I worked with had once told me about this place in southeastern Oklahoma, near the Kiamishi Mountains. He said it was quiet, not too far from Broken Bow Lake, and hardly anyone ever camped there because the access road was rough and not maintained. That sounded perfect. I packed light, just a decent tent, a sleeping bag, a cooler with some food and bottled water, a little propane stove, a folding chair, and a .22 rifle I'd inherited from my uncle. I wasn't planning to hunt, but I liked having something with me just in case. I took my old Ford Ranger, topped off the gas, and left the city around noon on a Wednesday. The first few hours of the drive were uneventful. Once I passed through Antlers, the roads got more narrow and patchy. I turned off onto a gravel road that quickly became uneven and overgrown. I had to slow way down to keep from bottoming out. It was the kind of road where you couldn't see much ahead because of all the bends and brush. You'd go 20 feet and feel like you were in a tunnel of trees. Eventually, the road opened up into a clearing near a slope that overlooked a small stream. I parked the truck on some flat ground and walked around a bit. No tire tracks, no trash, just wind, birds, and the low rustle of trees. It was perfect. I pitched my tent under a thick patch of pines where the ground was soft, then set up the chair and stove by the fire ring someone had left there years ago. I figured I'd stay 2, maybe 3 nights. That first night was uneventful. I made some scrambled eggs and toast on the stove, read a bit from a paperback, then crawled into the tent around 9. I slept better than I had in weeks. I woke up early the next morning and wandered a bit down by the stream, just looking around and enjoying the silence. I didn't see any footprints or signs that anyone had been there in a long time. The water was low, and the banks were muddy and untouched. Later that day, I walked maybe half a mile uphill to get a better view of the forest. I brought a small day pack and the rifle, just in case I ran into any snakes or coyotes. But I did find what looked like an old game trail. There were small prints, maybe raccoon or deer, and broken branches that looked too clean to be natural. I followed it for a while, but eventually turned back. I wasn't trying to get lost, and I didn't have cell signal out there. That second night, something felt off. I didn't see or hear anything unusual, but it was like my brain was trying to warn me about something. I couldn't put my finger on it. The air was still. No wind, no bugs. That might sound nice, but when you're out in the woods, dead silence is weird. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I kept the fire going longer than the night before, not because I was cold, but because it made me feel less alone. When I finally crawled into the tent, I zipped everything up tight and lay still for a long time. Somewhere deep in the night, I thought I heard a branch snap. Not like a twig under a rabbit, this was heavier, slow, like a boot crunching something dry. Then it stopped. No movement after that. I sat up in my sleeping bag and waited. Nothing. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon sniffing around my cooler, but the sound never repeated. It was just one snap, and then nothing. I didn't get much sleep after that. The next morning, I walked around the campsite. The cooler was untouched. Nothing had been moved. I checked the stream bank again for prints, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been near my tent that night. That afternoon, I thought I'd walk the same trail again and see if I'd missed something. I followed the bend around the slope, past some cedar trees, and back to the game trail. After 20 minutes or so, I found something that hadn't been there the day before. It was a soda can, crushed, muddy, and wedged into the dirt near a tree stump. That may not sound like much, but I was a few miles from anything resembling civilization. No trails, no campsites, no signs of other people. That can hadn't been there the day before. I was sure of it. The dirt around it was still soft, not dried or packed in by time. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. It was a Dr. Pepper can, half faded from the sun but not rusted. That meant it had been there recently, maybe even overnight. I didn't take the can. I left it where it was and headed back to my tent, walking faster than I had before. I kept checking over my shoulder like an idiot. I didn't see anyone, but I felt watched. I kept the rifle with me after that. That night was worse than the last. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing just outside the tent. At one point, I thought I heard something brush against the canvas, but I told myself it was just a pine branch in the wind. Only the wind wasn't blowing. Sometime in the night, I gave up and stepped outside. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I just stood there, waiting for my eyes to adjust. I could see the outline of my truck, the dark curve of the trees, and the edges of my little camp. I scanned slowly, letting my vision stretch out to the far edge of the clearing. That's when I saw something. It was small at first, just a shape, but the longer I stared, the more sure I became that it wasn't part of the trees. It was a man, standing on the edge of the woods, not moving, not hiding, just standing there. He was maybe 40 yards away, not close enough to see details, but close enough to know he wasn't lost. He was watching me. I stared back, frozen. Couldn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stared and waited. Then he turned, slow and stiff, and disappeared into the tree line. I didn't chase him. I didn't yell. I backed into the tent, zipped it up, and sat there with the rifle across my lap until daylight. To first light, I packed everything. I didn't cook, didn't eat, didn't brush my teeth. I just tore down the tent, threw everything in the truck bed, and left. I didn't care about the road. I hit every pothole, every dip, but I didn't stop. Back in town, I went to a car wash and sprayed the mud off the truck. I checked the bed just in case. I looked at the tent, the cooler, everything. Nothing was missing, but I felt like I'd brought something back with me. A memory I didn't want. I didn't tell anyone for a while. Not because I was scared they wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't want to say it out loud. The idea that someone had followed me, watched me sleep, and stood just far enough away to not get caught. It stuck with me. Still does. A few weeks later, I went online and looked up any crimes or missing persons reports in that area. Nothing popped up. Just an old article from years back about a man who used to live off-grid somewhere near the Kiamishi Range. They found his shack abandoned and full of trash. Never caught him. I don't know if it was him. I don't know if the man I saw meant harm or was just trying to scare me. But I do know this, he knew I was there. He'd been watching me, maybe even since the first night. That was the last time I ever camped alone. These days I still go out into the woods, but not without friends, not without signal, and never more than a few miles from other people. Because now I know, no matter how deep into the trees you go, no matter how far from the road you think you are, someone might already be out there waiting, watching, and doing their best to never be seen. And if you do see them, it's already too late.